Now that you have become more aware with your attachment style, how can you better understand why you feel, act, or react the way you do? For that, you must dive into the depths of your own core wounds. Identifying your core wounds is a process that requires a little bit of reverse engineering. You see, our attachment style is highly tied to our nervous system, which governs our fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses. Since our attachments represent the emotional bonds we form in our early years, our dysfunctional or insecure attachments in particular will dictate how we react when triggered. Now, what is a trigger? Triggers, which can be both pleasant or unpleasant, stem from feelings, the narratives we create by associating certain patterns of thought with specific emotions. In biological terms, triggers are a chemical reaction stored in the limbic system, an emotional, reinforced pattern that has the power to put the physical body in a state similar to the experience that created it. The stronger the response, the easier it is to get triggered. The more you get triggered, the stronger the response gets. As an unconscious belief that has been activated from interacting with the outer world, triggers alter your state of consciousness to match a situation from your past, so it can be either healed, such as an old wound, or encouraged, such as a healthy habit. Uncomfortable triggers are often related to themes of safety and security, and tied to another time in our lives where we felt similarly threatened and powerless, such as during our formative years, where we were dependent on our caregivers to satisfy our survival needs. Any stimulus to the senses that matches in frequency the traumatic event from your past can trigger feelings of severe anxiety or intrusive thoughts and protective behaviors like anger and emotional numbness. Just because something is familiar doesn't make it any less traumatic or damaging to your sense of self. The stimulus itself doesn't need to be inherently disturbing and may only indirectly remind you of an earlier traumatic event, if that is even the case. If you have experienced any sort of trauma in any stage in your life, particularly in childhood, and had no outlet, knowledge, or validation that allowed you to safely process that experience, it is most likely still playing in your life in a different form, often disguised through coping mechanisms of an insecure attachment style. Since you didn't know, couldn't understand, repressed, or were afraid to deal with those wounds, they mask themselves under another form to be played out in an attempt to be released and therefore healed. During childhood, these core wounds are highly tied to the formation of our ego, since they both occur during our infancy and are strengthened through our experiences. Remember that the ego's job is to avoid pain at all costs, which only causes more suffering. So when these wounds are activated or triggered, they often mask themselves as requests, demands, upsets, clingy, or avoidant behaviors. So how do these core wounds or inner child wounds usually play out according to your attachment style? For an anxious attacher, these core wounds are often related to themes of abandonment, rejection, and humiliation. These themes are hidden behind the protective layers of our ego and are portrayed in behaviors such as being clingy and needy, getting stuck in toxic relationships, believing that that is the best we will ever get. We worry that the people that we care about in our lives don't care for us in the same way or don't love us enough, which can activate some neuroticism. This focus on how others view us causes us a lot of anxiety, and we tend to overthink our value to the point we choose to withdraw ourselves from others before they can reject us. We are afraid to show up as ourselves because we believe we're not good enough. We may be deeply ashamed of who we are, even though we don't really know what that is, since most of our lives are spent feeding this need to constantly prove our value and goodness to others, to the point that we neglect our own needs. On the other side of the insecure spectrum, the avoidant attacher will find the same themes of rejection and humiliation, and also betrayal and injustice. As an avoidant attacher, we have high expectations and are in constant competition with ourselves, sometimes to the detriment of our own health. Our sense of worth is highly tied to the quality of our performance in any situation. In the quest to be perfect, we tend to have a disproportionate reaction to any unfair situation. This causes us to become rigid in our views, which may feed into the black and white way of thinking. This also means we value skills over feelings, and because we never truly experience a vast emotional range, we take things rather personally, deny our own physical, mental, and emotional states, and project our vulnerabilities onto others that we then attempt to micromanage or manipulate into changing their behavior. Now, oscillating between the anxious and the avoidant form of attachment, we find ourselves navigating the fearful avoidant attachment style. This disorganized style of forming our emotional bonds activates all core wounds in one way or another. It's a whole party, I tell you. The unpredictability of our childhood connections forces us into a state of hypervigilance and compliance. We were afraid of being ourselves and didn't have much freedom to explore the world, which in adulthood translates into not knowing who we are and what we like. We may joke about our shortcomings to hide our self-criticism and manipulate others to get what we want because we don't have the vocabulary to communicate our needs. We have a hard time understanding and regulating our emotions, and since we don't know what a healthy connection actually looks like for us, our internal tug-of-war is reflected in how affectionate and emotionally unavailable we become in our relationships. We may act as dependent to reassure ourselves that we won't get abandoned. However, since we don't trust anyone and are scared to make mistakes, we often withdraw from others before they can leave us. Because when we flee a situation is a very effective way of avoiding being rejected, right? This also feeds our need to constantly prove our value, often through the development of skills such as coercion, reinforcing codependency in the form of people-pleasing, and constructive criticism. Whatever your insecure attachment is, one of these 5 wounds is likely to dominate over the others. Since they are formed during our developmental stages of growth, our core wounds have a significant impact in our self-concept and identity. They are embedded into our personalities and manifest through our behaviors, attachment bonds, belief systems, relationships, understanding of the world, and our relation to the world. Acknowledging them can be freeing, uncomfortable, or triggering. Being open to addressing these wounds will allow you to step outside of your bubble to experience yourself in a new light. Yet, there is a reason why we keep reinforcing these relationship patterns. Evolutionary speaking, humans love what's familiar, even if this familiarity works against us. After all, it's all you've ever known, and to a certain extent, these coping mechanisms have been serving you up until now. The fact that you're curious about the information we're providing in this video validates the possibility that you may recognize the flawed nature of some of your coping mechanisms. Unless your attachment style is disorganized. In that case, you're gathering information to change someone else, so let me save you the trouble. It doesn't work. Once we realize how we protect ourselves, we can reflect on the origins of these designs. When did we start wearing that particular mask? With whom did we wear it? In which moments of our lives? And when was it most difficult to take it off? Acknowledging how our coping mechanisms or egoic masks are the obstacles we ought to overcome in our journey to personal fulfillment and self-understanding gives us great power and a sense of control because we can control our behaviors. And if we can't get past the toxic habits we have towards ourselves and the walls we put between ourselves and others, we will be building bridges to uncover parts of ourselves that we never fully explored. After all, our core wounds are the messengers that show us where we are disconnected from our own essence. Once we become aware of the information they are carrying, we can begin taking steps to rewrite that inner connection. In the following videos, we will explore how these wounds get triggered in our relationships according to our particular attachment style, and share with you some habits and perspectives that you can use to improve your emotional health and move you towards developing a more secure strategy of attachment. Stay tuned. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you there.